What's the worst thing to say at a funeral? The first funeral I ever went to was for my great-grandpa, and I was very young. Maybe around 5 or 6. My great-grandpa was a bit of a recluse. He'd always be in the basement when we went to great-grandma's house for Christmas. But I'd always sneak down there to see him, and he was perfectly nice to me. The person giving the eulogy opened with "John was not a good man." Again, I'd never been to a funeral, and I had no idea at the time how abusive he'd been to his wife, kids and grandkids. So to say I was a bit taken aback would be an understatement. It's probably for the best. Just because my family members had been sick, it's for the best to have them rot in the ground. For the best would be if they weren't sick to begin with. I know it's not particularly a tragedy, for 90 dies of cancer, but maybe don't tell their family. It's for the best. Just say "I'm so sorry" and move on. Literally never wanted to punch someone in the face, but that comment really made me consider. Years ago, my great-grandmother passed away from old age. I was asked to give a eulogy on her, and I decided to make mine a bit more funny. I told a funny story about how she once mistook a smoke detector going off as the telephone. I thought it was light-hearted, but my uncle was super offended and demanded I apologize to everyone. So I guess the worst thing to say at a funeral is anything negative about the deceased. They say, "Only the good die young ... But I guess they weren't talking about him because he is old. Billy Joel for the win. As you're getting physically ejected from the service. Who let the dogs out? Ruff, who let the dogs out? And finally, just as you're about to be dragged out the room, you knock over the coffin and say ... All y'all smell like ass. Something good happens to you, and someone congratulate you, which is "I wish you will be next," and you can guess which one I accidentally whispered in the ear of her son a day after his mum passed away. Most will curse me for this, but it will happen at my mum's service. She'd be 88 this summer. Her dad passed at 55. She's been saying since she was 50 she was going to die early like her dad. So I'm planning on standing up and saying, out loud, "Well, it's about time." Some of my siblings will snicker. Some will throw stuff. Kenny Powers at a funeral. Why candle box on a boom box over your shoulder? Give an amazingly egocentric eulogy speech, and close it out by playing Alive by Pearl Jam, singing the chorus to remind people that I'm still alive. My grandmother and I went to my uncle's funeral who committed suicide. My aunt and his mistress were both overweight, and my grandmother leaned over and said, "If I had to choose between those two heifers, I'd kill myself too." The whole family was right in front of us, and they turned around, awkward. Not the worst, but I never liked the "I know what you are going through." Parent or wife died after years of illness and misery and surgeries and expense and suffering, and your parent or husband keeled over in the backyard from heart failure. It is really not the same thing. My sister has always ugly cried through every wake and funeral. She decided to attend a random wake to see if she could get past her sobbing. No, she sobbed more than the family, and random people were consoling her. Nobody asked, but I'm sure they still wonder who she was and how she knew him. The worst thing would be finally, "Oh hallelujah," or "Baby, I really wanted to kill him, and he ruined my plans again," or "He was dead to me years ago, and now that he's gone I feel more alive," or "I want to thank the person whoever killed him right now. You know who you are." True story, one of my dad's friends gets really uncomfortable in funerals. When he had to attend one, he wanted to say something like, "May your kids live long lives," to the widow, but instead looked her in the eyes and said, "I wish this for your children." Only to tell them my nana, a great-grandmother, had passed that morning and wouldn't be coming back home. My 8-year-old son cries for a few minutes and says, "Does this mean I get my own room now?" In the death of a child, God needed another angel. Point 1, God is God and needs nothing. To show me chapter and verse, or it says we turn into angels upon death. 3, if a needy God has to kill children, he's not a God worthy of worship. I was at a very busy funeral, standing room only. The door opened and an old guy enters. He stood with us and then said, "I'm at the wrong funeral." Everyone at the back of the chapel that heard him tried not to laugh too loudly. My aunts were talking after my cousin's BF committed suicide, and one told the other honestly, this is the best thing that could have happened to her, she would have never left him. They wonder why no contact with them. Unlock the potential of cryptocurrency payments for your business. Dive into the Bitcoin payment gateway revolution. This was the sponsored comment I saw when I opened this thread, and I think it fits perfectly. I was 14 or 15. A friend's brother had died tragically, and it was my first time attending a funeral that wasn't for an old person. I accidentally said, "What's up? I'm 40 and have never forgotten that." Actually happened. I hate the makeup. Dad looks like a drag queen. Note: private conversation between my sister and I upon seeing the mortician's work makeup was fixed for the ceremony. Fuck this piece of shit. I'm glad he's dead. They sexually abused me for years as a child. Assuming nobody knew about the abuse beforehand and assumed the deceased was a model citizen. Not my case, but a hypothetical one. Boomer about their deceased autistic grandchild. He was never gonna be successful anyway. Was just gonna spend his whole life having meltdowns. Maybe not at a funeral, but at the wake. Someone died by suicide. Hanging to be precise. At the wake, people proceeded to play the pen-paper game Hangman. I've never forgot about it. Well, the casket was open and I just wanted to see what it felt like. Not the same, as it turns out. I suppose French kissing requires both of you to be into it. Sorry, Grandma. Guy goes up to the grieving widow and says, "A comfort." Widow says, "All words are a comfort." Second guy goes up to her and says, "Barjean." Widow says, "That means a great deal." I had an uncle who wasn't liked by most of our family. Our aunt, who wasn't all there mentally to begin with, showed up at his funeral with a hatchet to make sure he was dead. Find the old bag who keeps nagging people about why they aren't married or have kids yet, and ask them why they're not dead yet. Give them a taste of their own medicine. I was having a conversation with my mum, and this really flirtatious, confused old man remarked, "So, where's your spouse at?" At the funeral of her husband, my dad. In Russia there is a video that became a meme, where at a funeral a man said, "We see the deceased off on his last journey. We wish him health and ... and silence. I'm sure your dad is looking up at us from hell, and in between his screams of tortured agony, he's smiling at you because he knows he'll see you there soon." She looks so natural. That's true. If your idea of natural is lying in a coffin surrounded by flowers, pumped full of embalming fluid, she's dead. Dude, I have never been to a funeral in 18, and I think that the worst thing would be to talk about that person like they don't deserve to be on earth or even alive. Here, it's cradle of filth. It got me through some pretty bleak times. Try track for coffin fodder. It sounds horrible, but is actually quite beautiful. Here, it's cradle of filth. It got me through some pretty bleak times. Try track for coffin fodder. It sounds horrible, but is actually quite beautiful. An old friend, he passed away in 2020. His sister died in 2021. And he vented to me saying he wouldn't wish that on anyone, and my dumbass says I would. She never loved him. She was lonely and just wanted a free meal. That seems like a great way to upset a grieving lady who lost her husband. An older gentleman I know sent LOL messages on Facebook to grieving family thinking it meant lots of love, not knowing it's laugh out loud. An uncle once said, "At least he's at peace now." He was talking about his still alive brother. My other uncle at that uncle's wife's funeral. A relative asked me when we're going to Vegas, in the most hyped and amped up way possible right before we were about to bury my grandmother. Well, at least they're burning in the fiery pits of hell where they belong, to suffer for all eternity in God's most righteous torment. He used to owe me, my dad's friend told my mum. Well, looks you want money back by asking his clueless wife for my dad's corn. Where are we going to eat after this? The actual conversation after my grandmother's funeral She wasn't an especially great human. Well, one time I was at a wedding, and my grandma said, "You'll be next." So I started saying the same thing to her at funerals. She looked so natural. I wouldn't mind spending a couple of minutes in the coffin with her. If you know what I mean, wink. I know it's the standard, but when people told me my dad was in a better place, it infuriated me. Such a bullshit thing to say. Your husband was such a good lover. His cream pies will be dearly missed, and our threesomes will never be the same without him. Shows up in clown gear yelling, "I'm here to put the fun back in funeral." Possibly drunk and not even knowing who died. LOL. My only regret is not being able to sleep with her one more time. Would you mind turning around so I can say my goodbyes? After the service, before the burial, whelp slaps thighs and stands up. Let's bury this stiff and get some beers. For me, it's all the religious nonsense. I want to hear my loved one memorialize, not a bunch of readings from a holy book. Pro tip: remember that "I'm sorry" and "I apologize" can frequently be used interchangeably. Unless you're at a funeral. You've never looked better. That's the first time they've shut up. Who did their makeup? She doesn't look well. He will be sorely missed, mainly for that sweet apartment he had. Do you happen to know if that was rent controlled? Thankfully he died peacefully in his sleep, not screaming in horror like the other people in the van he was driving.